Hey folks, I've gotten in a fair bit of time on my Kitsune at this point, just over 100 hours, so I figured I would make a follow-up to my first impressions video. I know that this is a super long video, but I feel I make some points in detail here that perhaps haven't been made in some other reviews I've seen on YouTube, so hopefully you folks find that the length of this video is justified. First of all, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to anyone who left positive comments on my first impressions video. I'm not a YouTuber or a tech reviewer, and I don't have any interest in being one either. But if there is something I feel I can contribute or say of value, then there will be a video about it here on this channel. In this case, I really want to compare the Kitsune to a custom fight pad that I'm currently prototyping to give you an idea of whether it's worth it or not. But more on that in just a bit. Let's get going. Let's first do what I'm going to call a context disclaimer. There's 3 parts to this. First, I'm calling this video the 100-hour review because I obviously haven't experienced or explored every possible thing to do with the fight pad within this time frame. So this is how I feel as of now. Second, this is my first ever leverless controller or fighting game accessory of any sort. I purchased it after deciding to make fighting games, especially Tekken, a big part of my life again, as they were when I was a kid growing up and before life got in the way. They were great for my mental well-being, and honestly, I just miss playing them. Third, I am not a Razer fanboy. Trust me, I really do understand and agree with the sentiment behind the Razer tax, and that's why this is my first ever Razer product. I bought this because I saw value here for my own personal situation. So that's the context you should keep in mind as you watch the rest of this. Okay, if you haven't seen my first impressions video, there's a link down in the description below. I bring it up because I still largely feel the same way about the Kitsune, even after 100 hours of play on it. But there are things I have more thoughts on, so I'm only going to be talking about them. Those things can be classified into 3 categories: portability, the layout and ergonomics, and value proposition. Okay, so I feel even more strongly now that this is a great form factor. Here it is compared to my 14-inch MacBook Pro from the top and next to it. It's just slightly smaller, so I'm calling this a 13-inch laptop or the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. The reason I say that this is a great form factor is that Razer is not your mom and pop gaming peripheral company. It's not a startup either. The level at which it operates requires scale, which means potentially moving millions of units. That logic dictates that it's going to choose a form factor that appeals to the widest group of people. And Razer wouldn't decide to make and sell fight pads if there wasn't a sizable market to begin with. Fighting games are experiencing a renaissance right now, with so many great games recently released and on the way, so there's a lot of interest from folks outside the FGC, and that's especially true with Project L on the horizon. And it's likely that those folks will want a fight pad, and that it will be their first one. Therefore, the form factor has to be something that's familiar. What's more familiar than a laptop? I'm telling you guys, whether I play at home on my Lazy Boy or on a desk, or whether I take it to my local, it just feels right. I've nerded out a fair bit with some of the folks at my local and even gotten a chance to try their fight pads. They all feel either too bulky or too small, or just didn't have the right amount of space I needed to rest my palms, or were so thick that my elbows didn't rest at the ergonomic 90-degree angle I prefer. I mean, there's a reason laptop decks are the way they are, right? It works. And when laptop manufacturers stray too far from that established design in a niche product, or for whatever reason, they instantly get called out.
Thermal performance on the 9i comes from the triple fan setup. But the consequence of running a triple fan setup like this is that they've had to shift the keyboard down. The ergonomics of this whole device have shifted. I would always prefer a regular keyboard layout over this. There's something about how your wrist is kind of like half off the palm rest that just, it's not the best.
I've never once wished I could change my Kitsune's form factor in any way. And that really does mean a lot coming from a guy who felt the need to prototype a laptop deck style enclosure for his ortholinear Prionic keyboard and Apple trackpad to daily. You think that's nuts? Look at this monstrosity I'm currently working on that builds on this prototype, just because I like to doodle and take an insane amount of notes when I work. I'm getting off track here, but if you're interested in this, leave a comment down below and maybe that can be a video in the future. Plus, despite charging 400 Canadian dollars for it, Razer didn't include any protective carrying case, which I'll talk more about in the value proposition section, but you know what? I had a laptop sleeve lying around that fit perfectly. I personally love it when things can be repurposed. Now, of course, I have no idea if this is intentional, and it's likely not, and I've always felt that premium products should come with protective cases, but the fact is, when you stick to form factors that already exist, then repurposing accessories for them becomes just that much easier. The less waste there is, the better. Also, almost any backpack I have fits this thing. For my daily use, I like carrying this smaller sling bag around, and the joyous kid-like laugh that came out of me when I first realized that the Kitsune fits snugly inside of this is honestly indescribable. So yeah, Kitsune's form factor gets a wholehearted thumbs up from me. Okay, I will just say it. I am not a fan of the spread out Vuelich style layout. There's two parts to this. One is the button layout itself and the other is button mapping. Let's start with button mapping. Now, I'm aware that this is super individual, so this is just my experience. But I'm talking about it because I'm super interested in button mappings and this is my video. So yeah, feel free to skip the next little bit. Street Fighter 6 is my first ever Street Fighter and I play modern, which is very different to how classic controls play. I may be wrong here, but I feel with classic controls there's an established way to play that builds on previous Street Fighters. The few times I've tried Classic, I've come away with the impression that there's a certain logic and elegance in the Classic default mapping, with the 3-punch and the 3-kick buttons laid out the way they are. So, if you ask me if my gut reaction is to change it significantly, then I would say no. But it took me all of an hour of playing on the default modern button mappings to realize that this was just not going to work for me. So, I averted the, oh my god, I've made a giant expensive mistake and I hate playing on this outburst by playing around with the button mapping and pretty quickly settled on something I'm okay with. I'll leave my button mapping down in the description below if anyone else is curious. This brings me to the button layout. Where do I even begin? After having spent a few minutes playing on a hitbox at my local, I can confirm that this is essentially the same layout but with bigger buttons and a bit more spacing between those buttons. My feeling is that Razer went with this for the same reason that I talked about in the portability section of this video. When people are looking for their first ever fight pad, they're not going to do it in a vacuum, right? The more this matches established layouts, the easier that purchase decision becomes because it's a safe decision. I know I wouldn't want to gamble 400 Canadian dollars. So this layout is a wise business decision from Razer. But is it a good one? Hell no. Razer reported a net profit of $46 million in 2021. With such resources at their disposal, is this really the best they could do? They really could have pushed some innovation forward because if you've played Street Fighter 6 in any capacity, you know that this is just not an ideal layout for this game. That's the reason Japanese pros are modifying their fight pads. Not only do layouts like these make inputs faster and more reliable, but they are just more comfortable because the most frequent inputs are more accessible and require less hand movement, especially the kind that can lead to RSIs. Even within traditional layouts, I could argue that there are better options than what they went with. Look at all of these on Slagcoin. This brings me to how my own hands play on the Kitsune. Again, I know that this is super individual, but stick with me because I'm trying to make a point here, which is that the Kitsune won't cater too much to your individual needs if you have any. Even if you don't care for it, I'm sure there's someone out there who's going to appreciate that I talked about this. Okay, so my left hand rests pretty standard on the movement buttons, but I find it easiest to have my right hand's finger like this, where each of my fingers naturally come to rest on the X, the square, the triangle, the R1 and L2 buttons. That leaves the circle, R2 and L1 buttons. The R2 and circle buttons I can press like so when I lock the joints on these fingers. But it's not ideal, and I do find that I miss the inputs with these buttons around 10% of the time. Sometimes I do some hand gymnastics to get around this, but then I lose the proprioception of where my hand is on the fight pad, which is not ideal either. That brings me to the L1 button. There is no comfortable way of reaching this with my pinky unless I lift my hand off the controller. This I hate doing because too much of this makes my shoulder sore. So the only other way I can reach it is by moving my wrist sideways like this, which is a recipe for RSI. And yeah, if I put in a good 4 to 6 hour session, then I'll definitely feel my wrist. The other thing you need to take into consideration if you're thinking of buying this is the larger spacing between buttons. Look at my two hands. See anything weird with my right one? These two fingers are stuck together because I grew up playing racket sports like tennis and squash, and I still play several times a week. This is just the result of years of gripping rackets and changing grips for forehands, backhands, etc. I really had to force my fingers to spread, and while I eventually got used to it because my body adapted, I'm not so sure I'd still be playing on this if it hadn't. I'm not the only one with this concern about the button spacing. You can hear this directly from my wife and my brother and sister-in-law. So what do you think?
My fingers feel like there's a workout.
Okay, so
that has been
why?
Just gone through because of the reach. I have to reach a lot further. Yeah, small hand problems.
Okay, so ideally, what would it be like for you? If you could change this, what would it be like?
If I was gonna use your trick to use this part of my hand to hit it, it will have to be like lower here.
Yeah.
But otherwise, either the buttons have to be a bit smaller so they can be pushed up more closer to each other.
Yeah.
So I can just go like this instead of going like this.
Yeah.
Like this is a big reach for me.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
It's too much, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This thing. What do you think?
I don't like it.
You don't like it?
No.
So what's the pain point?
My right hand feels like...
Yeah, my right hand was most of the load, but
It's too stretched?
It's too not stretched.
Crammed?
Oh, it's too
crammed.
It's too cramped. Okay, but that's because you play piano, so your finger span is much higher, right?
Sure. I don't like the up and down locations. I know you can remap it, but it's just like, it's weird, and then I have nothing here.
Yeah. You can't use your pinky. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
The biggest thing for me, obviously, is to relearn all the buttons.
Okay, yeah,
on this, but for me, I think it's very ergonomic. Because even just sitting wise, I feel like everything is at right angles, and my fingers are evenly spaced out. Having played piano, it makes it a lot easier to kind of, instead of everything all cramped together.
Okay, so you actually prefer this?
We finally found the right demographic for this.
I don't know if I necessarily prefer this, because there is going to be a learning curve if you want to start using this if you switch over from a normal controller. But,
It was more so like how your hands feel.
Yeah, but my hands feel like really good on it. No issues whatsoever.
But are all the buttons easy to press?
For me, yeah, there's no issues.
Going whether on the bottom row or...
Yeah, no issues.
And even using your pinkies for the top and the bottom one?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't have any issues with anything. I mean, I'm not going to use these ones up here.
No, I'm talking about these two ones. This one and this one.
Yeah, I have no issues with one.
This is why there's a keyboard community out there with tons of different layouts. These are all in some shape or form a response to individual needs that the traditional QWERTY layout just doesn't cater to, especially for those that spend a lot of time on computers. I myself got into custom keyboards because a few changes here and there made such a difference to my experience of being on a computer. Here's an example. I've always hated reaching for the backspace. For a keystroke that's used so frequently, I have no idea why it keeps being placed so far away that requires me to move my wrist in this unnatural motion. On my Prionic, I have a split spacebar. This way, I have my traditional spacebar under my right thumb, which is how I've always pressed it, and the backspace is under my left thumb. Never have I ever felt uncomfortable doing this because my thumbs are my strongest digits. Plus, my brain just loves the elegance of having something that moves you backwards on your left thumb and something that moves you forward on your right. It's so similar to how the traditional arrow keys are laid out that it just naturally makes sense. And I can do really useful things like backspacing words at a time when I press the backspace button with the spacebar held down. It's also the same reason I use the Rocket Tie-On as my main mouse. All these customizable buttons put so much functionality at my fingertips without me having to reach unnaturally. Again, if you're interested in this, leave a comment down below and I'll answer any questions you have. And maybe that can be a video in the future if enough of you are interested. I apologize for going off on this tangent, and I will stay here for just a bit longer because I feel I can add a bit more color regarding this than some other reviews I've seen online. So please stick with me on this a bit longer. Okay, let's say we forget about Razer doing a fixed layout that's a little bit innovative. Look at this thing I've had my eye on for a while now. This is a keyboard where each key magnetically attaches to the base and lets you position them however you like. That is amazing. I even found a review of this thing on YouTube, which I will link down in the description below. But you can get this magnetic base in a square style or even in this one that prioritizes thumb clusters. It's just brilliant from a hardware standpoint. Even in tennis, you have all sorts of accessories to customize your racket so that it works for you because the industry realizes that everyone is different. Just as an example, you can get metal tape to apply to the head of the racket, or silicone putty that you can put in the handle of your racket, and that's all in an effort to change the balance point of your racket to your liking. The point I'm trying to make is that Razer could have opted to do much more here even if they didn't come up with something completely new and innovative. They could have taken inspiration from many things that already exist and run with it. So I do think that anyone who feels that the Kitsune comes with the Razer tax is kind of justified in their view. I'm kind of mad myself at the missed opportunity here. So yeah, a wise business decision by Razer, but not one that could potentially move the fighting game community forward. This finally brings me to the fightpad that I'm prototyping. This will cater to my individual needs and preferences. It borrows a bit from what I like about my Prionic keyboard that I daily, and a bit from what the Japanese pro players are doing with their fightpads. I wanted to talk about this since I'm only able to do this because so many others have kindly shared their designs online, and it's made me think critically about what I want so I can make this hobby a sustainable one. And if what I said about the layout resonates with you even just a little bit, then I think you will want to hear me out. So, why this layout? Well, there's two trends that I've noticed with the Japanese pro player layouts. One is that there seems to be a move towards utilizing both thumbs since obviously they are your strongest digits. The other is that the buttons are clustering around your strongest main digits so that they are easier and faster to reach. I know what you're thinking. Why the hell are these two buttons all the way out here? Let me show you my Prionic keyboard one more time to explain this. If you look at my hand positioning here, you'll notice that this meaty part of my palm rests right above these two keys. And it is incredibly easy and quick to press them with the palm of my hand. This heart key is mapped to enter, and I honestly hate it every time I have to use a QWERTY keyboard now because the span of my right hand doesn't allow for pressing enter without making the same kind of movement that I have to make when I press the L1 button on the Kitsune. This is why these buttons exist, to replicate the comfort I have on my Prionic keyboard. I've essentially taken the buttons that are the hardest to press for me and moved them to these positions. This layout also maximizes the number of buttons you can have within reach ergonomically, since Street Fighter 6 lets you map all possible buttons on a standard PS5 controller. This video I found describes the why behind this really well, and I've linked it down in the description below. And yeah, if you're wondering how the Kale Speed coppers I have in this prototype feel compared to the Kitsune switches, I much prefer my trusty Speed coppers. Although I have no issues with the Kitsune switches, the Speed coppers feel much more responsive. A good way of describing the difference between these two is through car suspensions. The switches in the Kitsune feel like the suspension on a Corolla, whereas the Speed coppers feel like the suspension on a sports car. So in summary, the Kitsune sticks to established norms, and in doing so, gives the masses a fightpad layout that will neither cater to individual needs, nor does it innovate ergonomics in any way that helps alleviate the general sentiment behind the Razer tax, or to move the FGC forward. And that is honestly a shame, even though I understand why that is the case. Okay, if you're still watching, wow, thank you. You are a champ. And I'm sure you're wondering whether I recommend this. Yeah, I do. Especially if you have some experience with fight sticks or fight pads and if you know where preferences lie. Like I said earlier, everything I said in my first impressions video still holds true, and that amounts to a mostly positive view. The thing is that Razer has scale. If you want one of these things, you can go order it right now and you will have it on your doorstep pretty soon. Whether you feel, rightly so in my opinion, that other consoles should be supported, or that Razer should have included a carrying case, or spare keycaps, or spare switches for the amount of money that's being charged here is kind of irrelevant. The reality is that fight pads are hard to come by at the moment, and that's even more so the case if you live outside of the US, where shipping and duties can essentially more than double your price. My brother also wants one after trying mine out, but he has a toddler, and he doesn't have the time or care to source or to build one. He just wants to play fighting games when I come over and have a good time. So the value equation isn't as simple as the MSRP in many cases. It's also officially licensed for PS5, and I still think that's a big deal. I love the fact that I can show up to my local or play in tournaments without any worry whatsoever. This controller that I'm prototyping that's perfectly suited to me can never be officially licensed as far as I know, so it will never realize its full potential. Yes, I know that the Brooks UFB board and the Wingman FGC exist, but in the former case it costs me more than the Kitsune did, and I still don't get official licensing in either case. And I'm not even including my own time and effort in this equation. At the end of the day, this is a nice, sturdy, well-built fight pad that strikes a nice balance between familiarity, form factor, portability, and availability, with a limited 1-year warranty if something goes bad. That's good enough for most. Again, Razer would not have brought this to market if they couldn't sell a whole lot of these. So yeah, I'm happy enough with my purchase, and I intend to keep playing with it. But if you're watching this and are interested, then I would keep in mind that the thing you interact with the most on your fight pad are the button layout and the buttons themselves. On the Kitsune, the buttons really do feel quite alright, but I would encourage everyone to print out a Vulex layout and just test whether that may work for you or not. At the same time, I think you should ask yourself some hard questions like, have I ever experienced discomfort when I sit at a computer and type for a significant period of time? Do I have to have things exactly right because good enough isn't usually good enough for me? If this didn't pan out, would I regret spending that kind of money? If the answer to any one of those is even a mild yes, then I would see if you can try it out somewhere first. For me, that would be at my local, and I found folks in the FGC to be super friendly and willing to let you try out their fight pads. At the end of the day, some of us will not be happy with ours and put it up for sale. Maybe that's a good chance to snag one if you really want one and don't want to pay full price. Okay, that is it. Subscribe, I guess? You've seen this channel, it's new. There's nothing here. Not sure what else I will want to talk about in the future, but I'll only post something if I feel I can say something of value. If you want to see something, let me know. Either way, I'll hang around in the comments if you folks have questions. Cheers!